The day had come quickly. Physically, Luca was prepared, but mentally he was somewhere else entirely. He spent the week making sure the plan was drilled into Leo's head, which didn't take long. He tried not to get emotional when he realized this would be their final heist. "You ready?" Leo asked as Luca gathered what he needed. Luca nodded, attempting to ignore the additional pairs of eyes on him. As hard as he tried, he couldn't help looking at Aya, who continued to stare at him even as Brooklyn and Leo fell into their own quiet conversation. He gave her a nod and she returned it, but behind the calm in her expression, he could sense worry. He wasn't sure if that scared him or made him feel admired. Since he had less than 20 minutes until he met with Enzo, Luca signaled for Leo to meet him in the van. Leo took his leave, along with Brooklyn, who would be camping out somewhere safe until everything was settled. But Aya stayed where she was. When Luca noticed, he paused, turning to her. He'd never seen her look so unsettled. He took a deep breath before saying, "I'll be fine. I'll make sure to be in and out. It'll be over within an hour." She didn't seem to be listening as she stepped closer to him. "You promised me you'd help me find my brother." Her hazel eyes were pleading. Luca's heart felt as if it would burst out of his chest, but he made sure to conceal it. He stood taller. "I did promise, and I'll make good on it." He made his tone sound as assured as possible. Aya stared up at him, a million words seeming to pass through her expression. The intensity behind it was almost too much for him to bear. She surprised him further when she took hold of the front of his shirt, pulling him into a harsh kiss. She didn't give him time to react as she moved back the smallest fraction, allowing him to see the threat in her eyes. "Don't die, Luca Romano." And with that, she was gone. Luca watched her leave, his eyes still wide with shock, and his mouth tingling from the embrace he least expected. Luca entered the manor, nodding a greeting to the men standing by the door. They returned the gesture but didn't question him being there. He knew it was because Enzo Romano made sure everything ran smoothly in his home, including visits. No one would be caught off guard. And if it wasn't an expected visit, Enzo's men had direct orders to apprehend them. Luca opened the door to his father's office, finding Enzo with his back to him, his attention focused on the large windows that beckoned light into the rather dim room. He didn't turn upon Luca's entrance, but Luca knew he was aware of his presence. "So," Enzo said with his gravelly voice, "what do I owe your visit?" Luca wasted no time. "I have Ophelia's rose." That gained his attention quickly. Enzo looked at Luca in disbelief. "How? It's a myth." "It's not. It was well hidden, but we found it in a museum." Luca retrieved the artifact, allowing Enzo to get a clear view of it. Enzo stepped closer, eyeing it in a way that had Luca's hope growing. Luca held it out for his father to take and inspect, watching astonishment dawn on his face at realizing he was holding the real artifact. "Amazing," Enzo whispered. Just as quickly, the look was gone and suspicion laced his tone. "Why did you bring it here?" Luca expected that question. "It's close to priceless. You can get twice the amount you've gotten from all of our stolen goods combined." He watched interest flash in Enzo's blue eyes. But of course, he wasn't a dull man. He would ask as many questions as it took to satisfy him. It also helped determine whether he was being played or not, but Luca anticipated it. "What's the catch?" Enzo asked, casting his son a skeptical glance. It was now or never. Time to initiate Plan A. "I want the heirloom of the daughter of Spain." It grew eerily silent. Luca never took his eyes off Enzo, but by the darkness in his eyes and the frown on his face, Enzo wasn't pleased. Finally, Enzo met Luca's stare. "What do you want it for? Money or a trade?" With the way Enzo asked the last question, it seemed as if he knew exactly what Luca was doing, but that wouldn't be possible. At Luca's lack of a response, Enzo continued, "I can't let you have it, son. There are too many people out there who want this heirloom, and I can't let them get to it. You understand?" His last words were a warning. Luca knew all too well. He turned to leave, but Enzo stopped him. "Here, take it." He gestured to Ophelia's rose, and Luca took it. As he did, he caught sight of a dark look in his father's eyes. Go buy yourself a new car or something." Luca nodded, squeezing the artifact in his hand. "Thanks." He closed the door behind himself and released a breath. It was time for Plan B. Luca stalked through the halls, scanning every inch before proceeding. During this time, the men would usually be in the dining room for lunch, so it was overly vacant. Leo, who was keeping watch from the van, would inform him if anyone was coming. Luca found the room and slipped in like a shadow, closing the door silently behind him. Instead of turning on the light in the small room, he clicked on a flashlight. He was greeted by a cozy scene. A faux mahogany desk sat by a wall with an extensive chair by it. A sleek, dark brown leather armchair sat in another corner, angled toward the ceiling-high bookcase filled with books. It was the perfect cover-up, Luca thought. No one would suspect anything with a singular glance, but from the few times he was allowed in this room, he knew what lay behind that bookcase. He approached it, reached for the thick brown book, and pulled it towards him. He tried not to dwell on that book, ironically being the Bible, instead watching as a door swung open within the bookcase, giving him access to the large room that lay inside. Once the door closed behind him, Luca found the light switch, squinting at the brightness that greeted him. He was met with various artifacts and heirlooms, all encased in glass, but he only came for one thing. Surprisingly, the heirloom of the daughter of Spain wasn't protected like the others, but left out in the open as if it knew Luca was coming for it. Luca wasn't an idiot. He checked for wires, gadgets, or any device that would give him away, but was met with nothing. His eyes narrowed. Regardless, he had to retrieve the heirloom if it was the last thing he did. So he reached into his pocket, pulled out a replica of the daughter of Spain, and meticulously swapped it. He released a breath as he pocketed the real heirloom and switched off the light. He did it. But a part of him complained that it was too easy. He pushed that voice away, labeling it as pride, and left the bookcase. Now all he had to do was leave the manor without being noticed and give Leo the signal to meet him by the bridge, and they'd be on their way. As he opened the door to the room, a gun cocked, stilling him in place. Enzo Romano stood before him with a stony expression, his arms crossed over his chest. Behind him, several men stood with guns aimed at the center of Luca's chest. He raised his hands above his head, keeping a firm stare on his father, but froze when he caught the eye of someone he least expected. Danny. He stood at Enzo's side with a hard look plastered to his face. He didn't falter at seeing Luca, and it made his actions for the past month finally make sense. He had ratted Luca out. "I expected many things, but the betrayal of my son was not one of them," Enzo said harshly. He didn't wait for Luca to explain, instead snapping his fingers at one of his men. "Search him." Luca knew better than to try and fight his way out of this. He allowed the men to roughly dig through his pockets, retrieving the heirloom. They also stripped him of his hidden weapons. Once they returned to Enzo's side, Enzo spoke in a cold and menacing tone. "I should never have trusted you. You're unworthy to carry my name or the title of leader of my gang." Luca didn't blink at the harshness of his words, knowing it was how Enzo felt all along. Enzo's jaw feathered at Luca's silence, and in the blink of an eye, he threw a punch at Luca's face, directed in the same place his jaw had healed, knocking him unconscious. Before he gave in to the darkness, his mind went to Aya and the broken promise he gave her. When he came to, he was tied to a chair. Unlike the usual ropes, these were made out of thick wire. The more he wriggled, the more the metal grooves dug into the skin on his wrists. He blinked away his grogginess, forcing his eyes to take in his surroundings. He was in the basement. It reeked of mildew and blood. From somewhere in the room, he could hear the drops of a leak in a broken pipe hitting the concrete floor. He knew there was no way of escaping. Even if he got out of his restraints, there were too many of Enzo's men. He was trapped, and he knew that soon he'd be dead. Enzo Romano didn't pity traitors, not even if they happened to be his son. Luca let his head hang. His thoughts went back to Aya as if second nature, and he inwardly scolded himself. He knew he'd never see her again, knew he never should have given her a promise he could break, depending on his plan's success. but a sprout of relief filled him that she was safe. She could still get away, even if he couldn't go with her. A door creaked open, and several pairs of shoes slapped against the concrete floor. Luca knew at least one pair belonged to Enzo, so he lifted his head and plastered on an unreadable expression. Enzo didn't hide his disdain. "I want answers, Luca. Why'd you do it?" When Luca stayed silent, he watched rage cover his father's face. Enzo schooled it just as quickly, letting out a dark laugh. "You don't want to talk? Fine." He snapped, and one of his goons approached him, a rather large one, and wasted no time in punching Luca in his gut. He coughed as his air vacated his body, but he still didn't speak. His silence rewarded him with a gruesome beating. The thug stepped back when Enzo raised a hand. Luca spat out blood, heaving in his breaths. He watched Enzo as best as he could, with one of his eyes now being swollen shut. His father aggressively grabbed his face, forcing Luca to look at him as he spat. "You're a worthless brat. I gave you everything and you betrayed me. You'll pay for your mistakes." Inside, Luca argued that Jesus already paid for his mistakes, but then remembered his dad wouldn't understand in the slightest. He settled on more silence. "But before you pay," Enzo said, as if coming to a great conclusion, "I have a story to tell you." By the look on his face, Luca could tell this wasn't a story he'd heard before. "If I knew you'd end up such a screw-up, I never would have given you a part in Ladri de Ladri. I thought I was doing you a favor, setting you up for the success I'd built. I figured it was the best thing I could do for my only heir. But that's the thing, Luca." His father's face split into a wicked grin. "You're not my only heir." If it was a reaction Enzo was hoping for, he'd gotten it. Luca sat up as straight as he could. Enzo seemed delighted to finish revealing his secret. "You see, your mother wasn't my first wife. I married before her, but that woman wanted nothing to do with my success and power. I say it intimidated her. She divorced me and hadn't said a word to me since. I remarried, but unfortunately lost your mother, leaving me with you. 2 years later, I got a call from my ex-wife's sister. She told me something I would have never guessed." Enzo rubbed a hand down his face, but he didn't seem upset, just empty. "I had another son, but my ex-wife kept him from me until she died of a sickness. It was hard to believe I had another heir, but after I took a DNA test, there was no denying it. He greatly favored his mother. He had her thick black hair, her nose, her tan skin, and her gray eyes." Enzo took a dramatic pause, as if waiting for the pieces to click in Luca's mind. It didn't take long for it to dawn on him, and his whole world seemed to flip upside down. "Leo was the son I always wanted but thought I'd never have, but luck was on my side. The moment I brought him here, I began training him, and he was a natural. It didn't take long for you two to grow close, and I figured it was because deep down you knew you were brothers. Sons of Enzo Romano." Luca's head was spinning, but not from the beating he'd received. Leo was his brother. For some reason that made him feel even worse, as if something important was right in front of him this whole time. Turns out it was. "Does he know?" Luca managed to ask past the swollenness of his face. "Of course he does. I had to tell him eventually, but I told him not to tell you. Turns out he kept his word." "What other secrets are you keeping from me?" Luca asked through clenched teeth, trying at his restraints again. "Many," Enzo's voice echoed as he dramatically threw his hands in the air. "But I'll let you in on one. That little girlfriend of yours that you're keeping at your hideout? Let's just say a while ago, I took a couple of important things from her." His expression said more than enough about what he was implying. "That's why I needed to get the heirloom back. The night your mother was killed, it was stolen from me. I sought after it, and thanks to you, or should I say Danny and Leo, it's back in my possession, and it's not going anywhere." Luca was rendered speechless. Why hadn't he guessed his father was behind such a heinous crime? Despite himself, he let his eyes dart to the corner of the room, catching sight of Danny. Danny failed to meet his eye, and Luca scoffed. Of course, the coward wouldn't face him. Enzo grabbed Luca's attention once again. "Well, since I have no more need of you, and Leo is long gone by now, I guess it's time to say goodbye." Cold metal pressed into Luca's head, causing him to wince. He stared up into Enzo's lifeless eyes, the usual blue now replaced with a ghastly black. Since there was no evident way out, Luca did the only thing that was left to do. The thing he'd learned to do throughout the years that had helped him in his darkest and brightest moments. When he did this, he came out better than before. And if this was his last moment, he'd prefer to spend it doing something he loved. He prayed. Eyes closed, head bowed, he prayed. When he neared the end of his prayer, he glanced up at Enzo. "When you pull the trigger, I know where I'm going, but I pray for God's mercy to be upon you, Enzo Romano. I pray that God Almighty will encounter you and soften your hardened heart so that you can be with Him too someday." He watched something flash in his father's eyes, but it was gone too quickly for Luca to identify it. If Enzo received Luca's words, there was no indication past that. Enzo tightened his grip. "Well, let's hope this heaven you speak of is real. If you'll end up there after all the crap you've done..." Luca closed his eyes, accepting his fate. He heard the shot go off but didn't feel anything. He dared to peek open his eyes and saw Danny attempting to pry the gun from Enzo's hands. Just as another shot went off, the door was kicked in. Men Luca had never seen before rushed in and immediately targeted Enzo's men. Luca watched in amazement as men filed in, each seemingly on a specific mission to immobilize every threat. He couldn't control the gasp he released as Leo ran into the room as well, looking alert and prepared. He had a wound on his arm, but it was tightly wrapped. Leo's expression shifted into relief when he saw Luca, and he looked behind him to say something to someone Luca couldn't see. When Aya and Brooklyn entered the room, Luca didn't know if he was frustrated or happy to see them. Aya said something to Leo when he started for Luca, making him stop and head in another direction. Brooklyn followed close behind him. When Aya reached him, she didn't give him a chance to speak. "I thought I told you not to die." Her voice was hard and scolding, but Luca heard the worry in her tone. He managed a weak laugh. "I'm still alive, aren't I?" He heard her mutter something along the lines of "barely" as she made quick work to untie him. The moment he was free, he stood on shaky legs, and Aya stabilized him by wrapping his arm around her shoulder. He knew without a doubt he wanted to kiss her, but he settled on doing it later. The fight was basically over, Enzo's men knocked out or worse, but Enzo himself was nowhere to be found. Luca assumed he had taken the cowardly route and ran away. He scanned the room of men, feeling his heart drop when he saw Danny lying on the ground in a pool of blood. "No, no, no!" He rushed over to Danny, falling to his knees beside him. He placed his fingers on his pulse, feeling the faintest of beats. He wasted no time in shaking him. "Danny, wake up! Wake up, Danny!" Danny coughed before weakly opening his eyes. He said Luca's name as if he doubted he was real. Luca grabbed Danny's face. "I'm here, Danny. I'm right here." Danny coughed again. He took in a shallow breath and said, "I'm sorry. I just wanted you to listen. I never should have trusted Enzo to talk to you." He was cut off by his own coughing and wheezing. Luca quickly shushed him. "No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brushed you off so..." "No." Danny's voice grew strong, demanding his attention. "I was an immature dunce who didn't want to listen. I knew Enzo was selfish, and I chose to ignore that if only to go back to the way things were. I was wrong. So wrong." His eyes closed painfully, and he inhaled a sharp breath. "And now I'm..." "No, you're not," Luca yelled, forcing his eyes open. "You'll survive, Danny. You will!" Danny seemed to ignore him as he said, "I wonder if heaven is real, and if it is, will it be too late for me to get in?" "No." Luca lowered his head, taking Danny's hand in his. "It's not too late." If Danny was fading, the least Luca could do was tell him the good news. So he did exactly that. He tried his absolute best to make everything comprehensible. He told Danny everything he'd heard, everything that convinced him to follow Jesus if only to be with him one day. Danny coughed harder. "I want Jesus. I want to be with him when I die." Luca smiled down at him warmly, telling him to repeat a short prayer. Danny eagerly complied, and it was the strongest his voice had sounded since Luca found him like this. He held his hand, pushing back the strong emotions threatening to break through him at any given second. Danny called his name and he focused on him. "Thank you, Luca. I may not be blood like you and Leo, but you'll always be my brothers." He watched Danny turn his head and smile at someone beside him, reaching his hand out to them too. Leo grabbed his hand and squeezed it. "Someday, we can meet again in heaven, but until then, get out of here, live a better life, and don't come back to this hellhole. It only leads to death, if not in your body at first, in your soul." His eyes fluttered closed and they didn't open again. "This is goodbye for now." Luca blew out a visible breath in the cold weather. "It is." Leo stood before him with an unreadable expression on his face. Luca held out his hand, but Leo slapped it away, pulling him into a hug. They patted each other's backs for a few moments before letting go. "Take care of yourself, Luca." Leo's words were heavy and Luca had to swallow a lump in his throat. Leo looked beside him and smiled. "You too, Aya." Aya returned his smile. "You better take good care of Brooklyn. She's not the most kind when treated otherwise." "Hey," Brooklyn blushed, crossing her arms over her coated chest. She looked at Luca. "I expect the same for Aya, but I'm more concerned for your safety." They shared a laugh and a few more words before parting ways. Brooklyn and Leo, hand in hand, one way, and Luca and Aya, another way. Everything worked out in the end. The heirloom was Aya's at last, and Luca was finally free. It may have come at a price, but he knew God had answered his prayers. Now there was one last word he needed to make good on. The harsh, icy wind slapped against the windshield of the car. As if he could feel the bitterness of winter from inside, he tightened the thick scarf around his neck and managed a quick look at Aya to make sure she was okay. She didn't seem bothered in the slightest. They rode on icy grounds, following the directions given to them by a friend. If he was correct, they'd find what they were looking for today. A building came into view through the snowy winds, and Luca pointed toward it, grabbing Aya's attention. He drove into the parking lot. Warm light seeped through the windows of the bar, and Luca wished he could teleport inside so he wouldn't have to feel the wind. They opened the door, the chill from outside managing to grab the attention of those closest to the entrance. Luca hastily closed it behind him. He scanned the cozy establishment, taking in the pale skin of those present. All but one. Only one had dark clove skin. Skin that looked like Aya's. Luca grabbed her attention, nodding to the man, and she returned the gesture to say she saw him too. Luca watched her take a deep breath and then hesitate. He touched her arm gently, giving her a look of encouragement, and she nodded once more, heading towards the man who was comfortably lounged on a bar stool, engaging in a conversation with the bartender in a language Luca didn't understand. As they drew closer, Aya told Luca to stay close, but don't make it obvious. He took a seat nearby, but far enough to not draw too much attention. He watched Aya sit beside the man. She spoke low, but Luca could still hear her. "Do you speak English?" she asked. The man tensed, but kept his stare forward. "Who wants to know?" "I'm looking for something, a stolen bird." Her coded words rewarded her with the man's full attention, and when he observed her face, a face identical to his expression changed from grim to shocked. "Aya, is that you?" Aya nodded, releasing a silent sob. "Yes, it's me, Avis." Avis pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. As if realizing something, he pulled back. "But it can't be you. Enzo Romano told me I thought you were dead." Aya shook her head, and for extra measure showed him the tattoo on her shoulder. As if second nature, he did the same, revealing a matching bird tattoo. They hugged again. Aya searched the place for Luca and found him shortly after. She gestured him over, grabbing his hand. She smiled at her brother. "Avis, this is my husband." His eyes narrowed instinctively, and Luca knew he recognized him. Aya was quick to explain how Luca helped her find him and retrieve the heirloom from his father, and although skeptical, Avis calmed. He took Luca's hand and thanked him for helping his sister find what was lost. "You have to come with us, Avis." Aya pulled on her brother's arm as they left the bar. Avis shook his head. "I can't, Aya." She paused, confusion gripping her face. "Why not?" Instead of answering, Avis told them to follow him. He unlocked a four-wheel drive SUV and gestured for them to get in. Luca opened the door for Aya before climbing into the back seat. They drove in silence, Luca mostly from exhaustion before they reached a large modern house. Avis parked and waited for them to join him. He started up the stairs leading to the house and knocked briskly on the door. It was opened by a younger woman with ivory skin, long blonde hair, and pale blue eyes. She smiled lovingly at Avis before looking behind him in slight confusion. When she noticed Aya, she gasped. She opened the door wider and stepped out of the way to let them in. Before they could fully enter, they were met with 3 pairs of wide eyes, one hazel, one blue, and one green. Luca faltered as the children threw themselves at Avis's legs, making him stumble. He laughed as he steadied himself, pulling them into a hug. As Luca watched the scene unfold, it was evident why Avis couldn't leave. He glanced at Aya to see if she understood and caught a dazed look in her eyes. Avis looked at them with a proud smile. "Aya, Luca, this is my wife and children." He turned to his family, sweeping a hand out to Aya and Luca. "This is my sister and her husband." The children, 1 girl and 2 boys, hugged Aya's frozen body with permission from their parents. Each of them couldn't have been much older than 5, and Luca later learned that they were triplets, all 4 years old. He blew out a breath at the thought of how much work that would be, but kept his comments to himself. Over dinner, which Avis's wife had already prepared, Avis told the story of how he ended up here. He managed to escape Enzo Romano and take the first plane out to wherever, which happened to be a country where it snowed more than not. He also told the story of how he met his wife, Evelina, thus resulting in his 3 beautiful children, Anya, Alexei, and Damien. Luca could tell Avis was happy, and he knew the exact moment Aya did too. They stayed for a week, and after exchanging contacts and promises to visit one another, left. Luca tried his best to cheer his wife up when they left, knowing all too well how it felt to leave a sibling. 6 months had gone by, and things had changed drastically. Luca himself had changed drastically, all for the better. Crashing waves met Luca's ears from the open windows in his home, and he smiled, never imagining agreeing to settle down in such a place. But Aya had a way of getting what she wanted more than not. Luca placed his car keys on the counter, scanning the kitchen and then the living room, but came up empty. Just as he was about to call out to her, he found Aya staring out at the beach by their home from their balcony. She wore a white linen dress that flowed with every soft breeze that went by, and she looked at peace. Despite not wanting to ruin that, Luca couldn't help wrapping his arms around her and releasing a deep breath. "I hope I'm not interrupting." He rested his chin on top of her head. She hummed her disagreement. "It's so beautiful out here. I'm so glad we bought this house." Even though he argued he didn't want it initially, his opinions were beginning to change. He hugged her tighter. "I was praying for Leo and Brooklyn and Avis," Aya blurted. "Were you?" he asked, almost as if by second nature. She hummed again. "You know, Leo and Brooklyn aren't too far from here. Maybe we can visit them soon." "Maybe," he echoed her. In truth, he was scared to see them again, but more so Leo. He'd barely spoken to his brother for the past year, only checking in every once in a while, but otherwise keeping silent. He wasn't sure why he was scared, but whatever the reason, he felt reluctant to see him. As if sensing that, Aya rested his arms on top of her protruding stomach. He smiled down at the perfectly round bump, placing gentle hands on it. Aya relaxed into him. You don't need to be afraid, Luca. God delivered you from your situation in His perfect way, and now you're free. It's time for you to start living like it." He knew she was right, but instead of replying, he lowered his head to kiss her cheek. How about a walk on the beach? He knew she'd agree, so he grabbed her hand and led her down their stairs, making sure she was careful since she couldn't see over her stomach. That was another thing she had to remind him not to be scared of. Their son, who would soon be coming into the world. They walked hand in hand down the length of the fairly secluded beach, letting peaceful silence engulf them. As Luca was drawn into his mind, he kept thanking God for his answered prayer of escape, for blessing him with people he truly loved, and most importantly, for allowing him to live the life he never thought capable for a man like himself.